You thought you were giving her space. You gave her freedom, not space to miss you. Freedom from needing you, not distance to create desire. Liberation from depending on you, not pause to build appreciation. Release from being tied to you. Space and freedom are different categories. Operate on different principles. Create different results. Space is temporary separation. Freedom is permanent emancipation. Space maintains connection. Freedom severs attachment. Space says, we're still bound, just not touching. Freedom says, no longer bound at all. You thought you were creating elastic. It would pull her back. You cut the string entirely. Thought you were loosening. Grip so she'd appreciate, hold you, let go completely. Thought you were stepping back so she'd step forward. You stepped out and she stayed in place. This isn't about her choosing freedom over you. This is about space becoming freedom without either of you deciding. About temporary distance transforming into permanent liberation. About strategic absence evolving into complete emancipation. You gave space. Space became freedom. Became freedom not through her decision, but through natural progression, through inevitable transformation, through what happens when space extends past point where it remains space. Space has expiration date, point where it stops being space and becomes something else, stops being temporary and becomes permanent, stops being separation and becomes liberation, and crossing that point transforms what you gave from space into freedom. You are managing space. Space expired into freedom. We're maintaining distance. Distance evolved into emancipation. We're creating pause. Pause developed into release. And transformation from temporary to permanent happened without announcement, without decision, without choice. Most men think space and freedom are same thing in different degrees. Think more space equals more freedom. Think extending distance increases liberation. But space and freedom aren't different degrees of same thing. They're different categories entirely. Space maintains relationship while creating distance. Freedom eliminates relationship by removing binding. Space says still connected, currently apart. Freedom says no longer connected, completely separate. Space is elastic stretched. Freedom is elastic cut. When you give space, you're creating temporary condition within maintained connection. When you give freedom, you're removing connection itself. Space operates within relationship. Freedom operates outside relationship. Space assumes return. Freedom eliminates assumption. You thought you were operating within relationship, creating temporary distance. You stepped outside relationship, creating permanent separation. Thought you were stretching connection. You severed connection. Thought you were managing space. You created freedom. And creating freedom when you meant to create space is fundamental category error, is misunderstanding what you were actually doing, is believing you were playing one game while actually playing completely different game. Space is strategic. Freedom is consequential. Space is chosen. Freedom is inevitable result. Space is tool. Freedom is outcome. An outcome of extended space is always freedom. Result of prolonged distance is always liberation. Consequence of maintained absence is always emancipation. You can't give extended space without it becoming freedom. Can't maintain prolonged distance without it creating liberation. Can't sustain ongoing absence without it generating emancipation. Space that lasts long enough always transforms into freedom. This transformation isn't her choice, isn't your choice, isn't anyone's decision. It's natural progression, inevitable evolution, automatic transformation that happens when space exceeds its functional duration. There's specific point where space becomes freedom, where temporary becomes permanent, where strategic becomes consequential. And this point isn't marked, isn't announced, isn't visible. It just is threshold that once crossed changes everything about what you're doing. You're giving space until day 6. You're giving freedom from day 7. You're creating distance until week 1. You're creating liberation from week 2. You're managing absence until certain point. You're generating emancipation past that point. And point where transformation happens is point where she stops needing you to come back, stops waiting for you to return, stops assuming you will reconnect, stops orienting toward your eventual reappearance. When she's in space, she's waiting. When she's in freedom, she stopped waiting. When she's in distance, she's expecting return. When she's in liberation, she's not expecting anything. When she's in pause, she's anticipating resumption. When she's in release, she's not anticipating. Waiting versus not waiting is difference between space and freedom. Expecting versus not expecting is difference between distance and liberation. Anticipating versus not anticipating is difference between pause and release. You gave space, expecting her to wait. She stopped waiting. Created distance, expecting her to expect return. She stopped expecting. Initiated pause, assuming she'd anticipate resumption. She stopped anticipating. And her stopping waiting is moment space became freedom. Her stopping expecting is moment distance became liberation. Her stopping anticipating is moment pause became release. These stops didn't happen through her decision. Happened through time's effect on space. Through distance's transformation of connection. Through absence's evolution into something else. Space can't maintain waiting indefinitely. Distance can't sustain expecting forever. Absence can't preserve anticipating permanently. All temporary states have duration limits. All strategic conditions have expiration points. All tactical positions have sustainability thresholds. Past threshold temporary becomes permanent. Strategic becomes consequential. Tactical becomes actual. And space becomes freedom. Distance becomes liberation. Absence becomes emancipation. You were trying to manage temporary. Temporary expired into permanent. We're attempting to control strategic. Strategic evolved into consequential. We're maintaining tactical. Tactical transformed into actual. This is what most men don't understand about giving space. You can't keep it space indefinitely. You can't maintain it as temporary forever. You can't sustain it as strategic permanently. Space that extends long enough always becomes freedom. And becoming freedom means relationship changed. Binding dissolved, connection severed, not through decision, but through transformation, not through choice, but through evolution, not through action, but through time. Time transforms space into freedom. Time converts distance into liberation. Time evolves absence into emancipation. And time's transformation happens automatically, inevitably, unstoppably. You can't prevent space from becoming freedom if you maintain space long enough. Can't stop distance from becoming liberation if you sustain distance far enough. Can't avoid absence becoming emancipation if you continue absence past certain point. But there's specific ways space transforms into freedom that reveals what you actually removed. When you give space, you remove your presence. When you give freedom, you remove your relevance. Presence and relevance are different things. Presence is physical proximity. Relevance is mattering to someone's existence. You can remove presence while maintaining relevance, can be absent while still mattering, can be away while still being important. This is what space is. Absence of presence with maintenance of relevance. But extended absence of presence eventually removes relevance. Prolonged lack of proximity eventually eliminates mattering. Sustained being away eventually destroys importance. Your presence maintained your relevance. Your absence removed your presence. Extended absence removed your relevance. Removing relevance transforms space into freedom. While you're relevant, your absence is space. When you become irrelevant, your absence is freedom. While you matter, being away is distance. When you stop mattering, being away is liberation. While you're important, not being there is pause. When you're not important, not being there is release. You thought removing presence temporarily would maintain relevance. Removing presence extended, eliminated relevance. Thought being away briefly would preserve mattering. Being away, prolonged, destroyed mattering. Thought absence, short, would keep importance. Absence long removed importance. This is what you removed when you gave space that became freedom. Not your presence, your relevance. Not your proximity, your mattering. Not your being there, your importance. And removing relevance is removing only thing that kept space from becoming freedom. Only thing that maintained connection during distance. Only thing that preserved relationship during absence. Relevance is what makes space space instead of freedom. Is what keeps distance from becoming liberation. Is what prevents absence from becoming emancipation. You had relevance. Relevance made your absence space. You lost relevance. Losing relevance made your absence freedom. Losing relevance wasn't her choice, was inevitable result of extended irrelevance unsupported presence removal. You can't maintain relevance through absence, can't preserve mattering through distance, can't sustain importance through not being there. Relevance requires presence to maintain. Mattering requires proximity to preserve. Importance requires being there to sustain. Remove presence long enough and relevance disappears. Create distance far enough and mattering dissolves. Maintain absence extended enough and importance evaporates. This is mechanism by which space becomes freedom, distance becomes liberation, absence becomes emancipation. Removal of presence eventually removes relevance. Removal of relevance transforms temporary into permanent. You thought you were being strategic, removing presence temporarily. You were being consequential, removing relevance permanently. Thought you were managing space. You are creating freedom. Thought you were in control. You triggered inevitable transformation. But there's deeper level to what freedom means versus what space means. Level that reveals why transformation is so devastating. Space implies you're coming back. Freedom eliminates implication. Space suggests return is expected. Freedom removes expectation. Space assumes resumption will happen. Freedom dissolves assumption. When you give space, you're saying, I'll be back. When you give freedom, you've removed, I'll be back, as possibility she's considering. Space maintains future together. Freedom eliminates future together from her planning. Her planning includes you when she's in space. Her planning excludes you when she's in freedom. Her future assumes you when she's in distance. Her future proceeds without you when she's in liberation. Her trajectory factors you when she's in pause. Her trajectory ignores you when she's in release. This is transformation from space to freedom, from being factored into future to being excluded from future, from being assumed in planning to being absent from planning, from being part of trajectory to being irrelevant to trajectory. You gave space thinking you'd be factored into her future with more appreciation. You gave freedom that removed you from her future entirely. Created distance thinking you'd be assumed in her planning with more value. Created liberation that excluded you from her planning completely. Future that includes you versus future that doesn't is difference between space and freedom. Planning that factors you versus planning that ignores you is difference between distance and liberation. Trajectory that assumes you versus trajectory that proceeds without you is difference between pause and release. Space maintains you in future. Freedom removes you from future. And being removed from future is being removed from mattering. Being excluded from planning is being eliminated from relevance. Being ignored in trajectory is becoming irrelevant to direction. You thought temporary absence would make you more important to future. Extended absence made you irrelevant. To future thought strategic distance would increase your value in planning prolonged. Distance removed you from planning thought tactical pause would enhance your position in trajectory sustained pause eliminated you from trajectory. This is what freedom means that space doesn't mean. Future without you. Planning that excludes you. Trajectory that doesn't factor you. Existence that proceeds as if you don't exist. Life that organizes as if you're not coming back. And life organizing as if you not coming back is life that won't reorganize when you do come back. Existence proceeding without you is existence that won't pause for your return. Future excluding you is future that won't include you when you reappear. Space allows return. Freedom makes return irrelevant. Space accommodates reappearance. Freedom has moved past accommodation. Space leaves room for you. Freedom has filled room with something else. You gave space expecting room to remain. You gave freedom that filled room. Created distance assuming accommodation would wait. Created liberation that eliminated accommodation. Initiated pause believing return was assumed. Generated release that made return irrelevant. But their specific moment transformation from space to freedom becomes visible, becomes evident, becomes undeniable. Moment you return. When you return from space, she's been waiting. When you return from freedom, she's moved on. When you come back from distance, she's expecting you. When you come back from liberation, she's not expecting anything. When you reappear from pause, she's ready to resume. When you reappear from release, She's already resumed without you. Your return reveals whether you gave space or freedom, whether you created distance or liberation, whether you initiated pause or release. Return to space is welcomed. Return from freedom is disruption. Reappearance in distance is expected. Reappearance in liberation is irrelevant. Comeback during pause is anticipated. Comeback after release is surprising. You return thinking you gave space. Her response reveals you gave freedom. Come back believing you created distance. Her reaction shows you created liberation. Reappear, assuming you initiated pause. Her behavior proves you generated release. And her response to your return is how you discover what you actually gave, how you learn what transformation actually occurred, how you realize space became freedom without you knowing. Most men discover they gave freedom when they tried to return from what they thought was space. Learn they created liberation when they attempt to come back from what they believed was distance. Realize they generated release when they seek to resume what they assumed was pause. Discovery happens at return. Revelation occurs at reappearance. Understanding arrives at comeback. And by time you discover you gave freedom, it's too late to give space. By time you learn you created liberation, it's too late to maintain distance. By time you realize you generated release, it's too late to preserve pause. You gave space thinking you could manage it. Space became freedom while you thought you were managing, thought you were being strategic. You triggered consequential, believed you were in control. You activated inevitable. Space became freedom not because she chose freedom over you, because space naturally evolves into freedom when extended past sustainability point, because temporary naturally transforms into permanent when maintained past duration limit, because strategic naturally becomes consequential when continued past effectiveness threshold. You didn't give her space, you gave her freedom. Gave her freedom not through single moment of giving, but through extended duration of absence. Not through her choosing freedom, but through space's inevitable evolution. Not through decision, but through consequence. Not through action, but through time. And giving freedom when you meant to give space is removing relevance when you meant to remove presence. Is severing connection when you meant to stretch connection. Is ending relationship when you meant to pause relationship. You thought you were being strategic. You were triggering inevitable. Thought you were managing temporary. You were creating permanent. Thought you were controlling outcome. You were activating transformation. She's free now. Free not because she chose freedom, because you gave space that became freedom. Not because she wanted liberation, because you created distance that evolved into liberation. Not because she sought release, because you initiated absence that transformed into release. And her being free means your return doesn't matter. Your coming back doesn't register. Your reappearance doesn't affect. Because freedom means future without you, means planning that excludes you, means trajectory that ignores you, means existence that proceeds without you. You didn't give her space, you gave her freedom. And freedom is permanent condition, is irreversible state, is transformation that doesn't reverse. You can't turn freedom back into space. Can't convert liberation back into distance. Can't transform release back into pause. Once space becomes freedom, it stays freedom. Once distance becomes liberation, it remains liberation. Once pause becomes release, it continues being release. This is what you did when you gave space that extended too long, when you created distance that lasted too far, when you initiated absence that continued too much. You gave her freedom. And freedom is what she has now. What you keep having. What doesn't reverse when you return. You thought you were being strategic with space. You gave her freedom through time's inevitable transformation.